You heard a lot of ideas. Some of them are, I would say, easily putable together. You can put it in one basket and say, okay, this is step by step what to do and how to change the educational system we are experiencing and the world of education in general. Naturally, some of them are a little bit different and are a little bit on the opposite side than the first idea I have mentioned. Let's talk it in a little bit more detailed in a panel discussion. I would like to ask Bohdanna Kesala to join me on stage, because she will be hosting the panel discussion that will be concentrated exactly on what should we be investing in. Bohdanna, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you. Very good, very good. I'm enjoying it. Are you all enjoying yourselves? Yes?
We will talk with the speakers about the future of workforce and education.
Yes.
From what you have heard, is there something that shocked you, something that you have never heard before, or something that was, pointed out in a perfect way?
Well, the panelists and I got together upstairs and talked about what we were going to discuss here, and we have a native Czech speaker up on the panel, and something that he had mentioned, just made me think twice. And while Danielle and Stacey were talking about having a bachelor's degree and kind of how important that is, he corrected us and said, actually, in the Czech Republic, it's very important to not only have a bachelor's degree, but also a master's degree, and how important that is to actually be successful. And so I was like, wow, how long does that take? Because different countries take different amounts of time, and it's 6 years by the time you finish. I'm the director of the international summits for Singularity University, and we had a summit in Mexico a few months ago, and we had the president of the University of Monterrey be on a panel just like this. And he says he welcomes his students every year, and he stands up and he says, thank you for being here. I want to warn you that everything you're going to learn in the next 4 years is going to be obsolete, and I'm sorry about that. But if you want to stay, I'm going to try my hardest to teach you. So it's
that's a motivation.
That's motivation, right?
You should make living as a motivational speaker.
But it's kind of going back to the idea that 6 years is a very long time, and changing education, as Danielle said, is going to be changing our mindset on what that path actually is. So that's kind of what we're going to be discussing here. Before we do start, I do want to say one thing to the audience. Thank you. So as I said, I'm the director of international summits, and I work with the partners all over the world. We did have the three fathers up here talking about how they brought SU, and we're very happy that they did. But they forgot to mention someone. There is a mother as well. Her name is Eva Hanakova. She has absolutely been the most amazing partner. I've been working with her for the last year to bring this summit here, and I definitely want to make sure that she gets the recognition that she deserves, because none of us would not be here if it wasn't for her. So please, a round of applause for Eva. I'm sure she's hiding under a rock right now, embarrassed, but I do want to make sure that she gets the credit that she deserves. So I guess with that, we'll have our panel come out.
Let's go for it.
Yeah,
Bohdanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Please. And we all know Stacey, Danielle, Vivian, and we also have Jan, who I'm going to ask for him to introduce himself, since we all have the backstory here of everyone else. Please introduce yourself, and we'll kind of start after that. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jan. My story, just like with the others, hasn't always been easy and straightforward. Currently, I'm working for the Czech Academy of Sciences at the Department of Space Physics. But you would never guess I would do this just like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, actually, I became seriously ill during my studies at the university. Had to drop out for half a year, and this made me completely reconsider the priorities and the stuff I'm doing. And if this didn't happen, if I haven't gone through this drawback, I would probably end up as a regular mechanical engineer. Nowadays, I'm a space engineer and scientist developing experiments for European Space Agency and NASA. However, throughout my studies, I also worked with international students within an NGO that focuses on exchange programs. You may know Erasmus Plus program, within which we fostered the international mobility and improved the conditions of students abroad, and we conducted a lot of studies that proved that international mobility and studying abroad significantly improves your employability as well as overall life perspective on things. As soon as you move abroad, you get more independence, you improve your language skills, and these are also important things for workforce these days.
Thank you. This kind of goes back, Vivian, to what you were saying earlier about how if people follow the path that's been put in front of them, either by their families, parents, society, they're actually going to be less successful in life. And I'm wondering how much of going abroad is meaning actually getting away from that path that's in front of you.
Well, you know, it's interesting. There's a bunch of research in this idea of dynamism, economic dynamism, and it's defined operationally in terms of things like, are you willing to leave your job for another? Are you willing to move to get a better life? Are you willing to found your own company? And this has been declining. It's been declining in the United States. It's been declining around the world for a significant period of time here. And, you know, how are we training people to be dynamic if what we're telling them is there's one path, you go through school, you get the right degree, you do what we tell you to? I mean, if I were to decide how not to robot-proof your kid, that's the perfect solution. But what I think is really interesting is then when we actually go and we do the research, this thing which feels like the sort of safe path, this guaranteed, it turns out it actually robs you. It very clearly, people that follow these paths don't live as long, they aren't as happy, they aren't as successful in life. So, I realize that what is up here, but for illness walking in the door and so forth is a kind of courage, and it's easy to say we did this and so everybody should do this, and it's kind of like me saying, go jump off of a cliff and just believe me, you'll end up higher than where you leapt off from. And I think there's a missing ingredient here in our discussion so far about how you actually get people to believe that these sorts of choices will change their life when everything in society points them in the other direction.
And, I guess I would just want to make a quick point here for everyone in the audience. None of us up here are bashing higher education. I personally have 2 degrees. I have a master's degree. Obviously, many of us have degrees up here. It is more about bringing up the discussion of changing our mindset and changing about what this one path of success can look like in the future that looks nothing like our past. And that's what David talked about earlier. Our future is not going to look anything like our past. And so this panel talking about education is really also discussing how are we going to educate our children and ourselves, because education is a lifelong journey. It doesn't just happen between 5 and 15 years old or 18 years old. This is a lifelong path. So while we may be saying things about, for those of you out there with, probably most of you have a degree in higher education or a higher education degree, it's not about diminishing that success. It's more about just thinking about what does that actually look like in the future. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Actually, just to extend that slightly, so I said on stage here that my research shows that the university you went to, even elite universities, didn't add very much. But that was when you look at everyone. When you look at people, and I'm just going to shorthand this grotesquely, when you look at people that are ready for that kind of an experience, it can actually be having a huge impact on people. But far too many people go to school because they think they're supposed to, because they've been told to go to school. And this is probably even more shocking, finding that the elite universities only have a small impact. We found the bottom 2/3 of universities actually had a negative impact In other words, if you hadn't gone at all, you might have actually been better off when you take everything into account, the costs in the United States, the costs of going to university and so forth. But when someone's ready for it, it's this amazing experience that can be transformative.
Yes. And so, Stacey, going to you, and if many of you saw the graph that was up there, she had a few times where she went to school. So you did go back to NYU, and then you left and you went back. And, you know, how did you manage that? It's courage, but it's also deciding when and how you're going to focus on what. And I guess my question to you is, how did you make those decisions in those moments and times? And also, what kind of feedback did you get from your crew, your tribe, and your family?
Yeah, so education, or I guess university in the traditional sense, for me has always been a place that I've used to explore. So I used it at kind of these transition points where I didn't quite know what I wanted to do next, but I knew that I had other interests, and I knew that college, university would give me an opportunity to explore. So after I sold my first company, while I was working on publishing the book, 2 Billion Under 20, I went back to NYU, and I used that as a time to just say, all right, I'm going to use the next 9 months, and I'm just going to learn as much as I can possibly learn and take in as much content as possible and just see what I'm interested in. And from there, maybe something comes about, maybe it doesn't. Happened to come up with the idea for Forge while I was during that transitionary period. So I think for me, I use school as my traditional education as a way to just explore new things. My parents are much more traditional in the sense that for them, the thing that they grew up knowing, so my family immigrated over to the United States from Portugal. And my father thought, you know, the only thing is you get a college education, you get an entry-level job, and then you work your way up the corporate ladder. And my dad has this great success story of that being true in his life. But I realized that isn't necessarily the world that we live in today. And so that was a big conversation with my parents, saying, hey, you know, not only did I drop out of college once, but I did it twice. And to them, the only thing that really mattered was that I would get my degree. So that was a big kind of internal family discussion. But at the end of the day, I was older than 18 and I knew what I wanted to do. So I ultimately made that decision.
So Danielle, working with Stacey and working with other millennials or people under 23, first at the Teal Foundation, then in 15, 17, have many of them tried to go back to university, or have, with the success comes, because I think with every success probably comes, 100 failures in this process, and one, we need to change the idea that failure is a bad thing. Just like you said, it's fail and learn. But going back to your experience in working with these people and mentoring these people, from 2011 when the Teal Fellowship first launched until now, how do you feel that the mindset has shifted on this topic?
Yeah, the mindset has shifted greatly. When the Teal Fellowship was first launching in 2011, it was really unheard of to talk about the higher ed bubble. If people just didn't talk about if you should go to school or not. It was you go to school. Myself, growing up, when I got into college, my first thought was, I wonder if I actually want to go. And then my mother said to me, it's a privilege to go to school. You're a woman. People have fought for this. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. I guess I'll go to school. What I think is interesting about an argument like that is that, there are privileges that we are afforded, but there are privileges to choose something, not just to do it. And so we've seen that conversation really, really shift. It's extremely common now when I'm on campuses, and I go to campuses about, I'd say, twice a month. This is where we give out our grants. We start to meet people long before they consider themselves as an entrepreneur or a founder. But people come up to our table all the time and talk about taking a gap year. Maybe they've already taken one. Maybe they're considering one. We often meet with young people who will have done an internship somewhere over a summer, and at the end of their internship, after freshman, sophomore year, the company will be offering them a full-time offer. And so for some of them, they'll say, you know what, I think this is the path that I want to go on. I want to go work with this company for a few years. School is always going to be there. I think one of these things about lifelong learning is that it shouldn't be about finishing your degree, number one, and it shouldn't be about finishing your degree within a certain amount of time. If there are different opportunities for you, I don't see a reason why you shouldn't entertain them. And should you want to go back in the future, kind of like what Stacey did, there's no reason why not. There are opportunity costs as we get older as well, but these are just things that we have to balance out because the opportunity costs when we're younger, I think, are steeper than they ever were.
And looking at education now as a lifelong journey, we've definitely segmented education into certain parts in our life, and it usually ends around between 23 and 25, depending on how far you go. And then, there's this now idea that since it's not formalized, that we're not being educated anymore, either through experience, educating ourselves through, visiting a museum, going to talks, coming to seminars like this and summits. So I just want to throw out to the entire panel on that discussion on really shifting people's mindset that this is a lifelong experience and that we should never stop ourselves. And to you, Vivian, specifically, you're about the data, right? So how does that change, that mindset shift, how does that change people's lives?
Well, what's interesting about mindset is so if those not familiar with the concept, this is a sort of famous construct developed by Carol Dweck at Stanford, and it has these two components, whether you're fixed or growth mindset. So do you truly believe you can change, or you're just who you are? And what's amazing is it's one of these constructs, which is highly predictive. But what's even more interesting is the growth mindset of your parents is highly predictive of how you will perform, of your managers is highly predictive. So I talked earlier about the importance of role modeling. As a parent, turns out role modeling as a business leader is just as important. It doesn't matter what your memos say. It depends on who you are and what you do in your workplace. And that includes this growth mindset dynamic. If you think you're a Six Sigma company and everyone's a cog and you just train them hard until they fit exactly right into your system and anyone could fit there, then there's no growth and there's no opportunity for people to change. If, on the other hand, what you see as your leadership responsibility is I'm here to facilitate the creative exploration of my incredible team that understands things about our problem space that I am never going to understand, then you have a chance to do something different. But boy, that's hard. In the classroom or out, we're kind of talking about, in classroom, we call this student-based education. Mm-hmm. So now maybe there's this idea of an employee-based management structure where they're the real focus of what goes on. And your job is to align them, is to create a culture for them to be success, rather than to tell people what to do, because there's simply no gain there. And so that becomes a big element. And what does it actually amount to? All of the constructs I had up here on an individual level are sort of population statistics, but generally speaking, you see substantial differences. So entrepreneurs, there's a paper published last year, I cite lots of research. Paper published last year in Science, but it was part of a larger body of research. And they were essentially, put it this way, they were looking at entrepreneurs, and they broke them into 5 groups. One group got no special training. Another group got financial training. Third got essentially a crash course MBA, growth mindset training, and resilience training. And we can talk about how you train those. I think you have to really think hard about what that means. But it's the results that I think spoke for it. No statistical difference between the MBA and finance training entrepreneurs and those that got no intervention whatsoever. But I think it was the growth mindset group, 60% more of their companies were still in business 2 years later. That is a huge effect. I mean, an unbelievably large effect, to be perfectly honest. And you see similar sorts of stats with the group that got resiliency training, and you realize, wow, this is a big part of what it is to be successful, is not being able to read, P&L or to figure out exactly the right way to structure your cap table. It's about getting stepped on and standing up again. And if you start a startup, that is it. That is the experience. Yeah. And if that's the kind of person, whether they are doing a startup or inside your company or doing something creative in another sphere of society. It's that kind of growth and resilience that's truly meaningful and predictive. So we can talk about how to build it, but the numbers are like shocking in terms of what they show about outcomes.
Yes, Jan.
Well, to answer your question regarding the change of mindset,
Yes.
I think that what would actually really help if the education institutions would, rather than giving answers, start asking questions, because human mind is beautiful, creative thing. By default, we are all creative. And what I really like is to question the status quo. I don't like being delivered an answer. And if we all would go through the process when we are just being asked questions, each one of us would just go through the internet and look up the answers ourselves and put together the image. Because, and that's what's missing, because right now we are just given the answers without even questioning it. This is the data, this is the information you should learn, and that really reshapes the thinking of people and makes them a lot less creative, while creativity will be the thing that is necessary for growth of personality in future.
Well, and what Vivian said is the future job description is just creative thinkers, you know, and so to educate creative thinkers, it's not about Googling an answer, but to be able to actually use your mind to be able to answer questions. I want to go to you, Stacey, because you are running a business. How many employees does Forge have?
We've got 10 people today.
10 people. Okay. And so how have you, in what we've all been talking about here, you're the CEO, you have 10 people working for you, and you're running a very successful business. How have you kind of taken all this, and how do you run your companies with this mindset?
Yeah, so I think my mentality around hiring people is maybe cliche for Silicon Valley, but I've always believed, like, hire people smarter than you and then get out of their way. Like, these are people that are good at what they do already, but more importantly, during the screening process, I'm looking for people who want to continue to learn and people who can be self-directed learners. So people who are able to kind of look back at what's the work that I've done, how can I assess the work that I've already done and identify opportunities for my own self-improvement, and then go find answers to how I can do that better next time around with my network or with access to the internet or whatever it is. So that's specifically what I look for. And then my job and my role is to align them with the company's goals. So I do one-on-ones with my team every week, and especially top leadership. And I always say, what are your top 3 priorities? What are your top 3 goals? Make sure that those align with what we're doing, and then always ask, how can I be helpful? What resources can I bring to you to help you learn, to help you grow, not only for your time here at Forge, but for your own career? And that's the mentality that I try and take into my own management.
Yes, Danielle.
I want to jump in for a second on what Stacey is saying about management. Actually, I think it's become quite popular to think about flat structures in companies. I think flat structures can work when done well, but I think flat structures are often an excuse for bad management and not learning how to grow human potential. I'm really happy to see lots of nodding up here. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get like fruit thrown at me or what. But I think when we're thinking about adult development and growth, our places of work are places that we learn and grow and develop. And if the management team isn't asking colleagues reflective questions, if they're not doing like 360 reviews, things like this, that environment is going to get more stagnant. And so I really do think that we need to look at like the best hiring practices, the best management practices that we're seeing top companies doing, and try to emulate them across, because that will force the workforce to keep being lifelong learners if that's also instilled within the environments that we're in.
For some reason, Tony Hsieh just popped into my head. So Tony, who's the CEO of Zappos, and he wrote the book Delivering Happiness. Zappos is a company that first started delivering shoes to men and women in the United States. And it was like you ordered a pair of shoes, it showed up on your doorstep literally the next day. If they didn't fit, it was free returns and you would just ship it back. And Amazon ultimately purchased Zappos. And but what Tony was very known for was changing the work dynamic, changing the way an office is structured. You know, the idea behind having a business like this is, you know, the customer is always right, but what he changed the dynamic, saying that his employees were actually more important than the customer. And so even things like this website just shut down over the holidays. It was done. Like, no, my people need a vacation, you know. And so that's however $1 million in revenue, but he would just shut it down. And so thinking of, you know, this, he I think was one of the first people to actually put this on paper and show that it can be done, or it can be done differently. Let's say it can be done differently. So he, for those of you, I highly recommend reading the book. It's Delivering Happiness. Yes.
So you mentioned Amazon, and I have the privilege of being recruited for a number of sort of chief scientist-like positions at companies like this. So at Amazon, it was a totally new role. So let's call it chief scientist for people. And the whole idea was, how do we use artificial intelligence, real-time experiments, technology to make the best workforce? And the way they pitched it to me was, in 7 years, we'll be a 1 million person company, and your job will be to make their life better, which was the first time a big company has ever gotten me to actually go visit and meet with everyone. That's the perfect pitch for Vivian, Ming. The reality is, without knocking Amazon, there's only one job description at Amazon, and it's do what Jeff says. In complex and creative ways, but nonetheless. So I actually made them the counter offer that they didn't have to pay me anything, just call me a fellow, but I'd only do what I wanted to do. And so they didn't like that idea.
Okay.
But I throw it out there, not because I'm leading somewhere, not because I'm about to make a policy statement, but just to let you know, this is the sort of thing that companies like Amazon, and as you know, as a function of that, Zappos and others are really pushing far into what it means to create a personalized employee experience, all the way down to their warehouse workers and their logistics crew. And then the sometimes complex ethical decisions about what that means. I'm not going to put words in Amazon's mouth, but some of its feelings about unions differ from my feelings about unions. And, you know, that was part of the way they wanted to leverage this technology, was to further the company feelings about that. And, you know, that might have some really big implications. So you're deciding how you're going to approach talent and lifetime growth inside your companies. I think you need to be really honest with yourself, and I hope your employees, about what your goals for them actually are and how you're going to leverage some of these technologies. Because as I'm sure you'll talk AI tomorrow, and perhaps more this afternoon, it's not magic, but it is immensely powerful. And the sorts of things it could guide people to could be wonderful, or they could be really incredibly intrusive.
So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, because at least 50% of our audience are coming from the private sector, management, business. And we are talking about, you know, speaking directly to them about how to, you know, really disrupt their business to bring happiness to their employees, right? But where's the responsibility? I think let's just touch on that subject of responsibility. We do need to take responsibility for ourselves, to change our own mindset, to change our mindset to become lifelong learners. But where do we see the responsibility of the managers of these large corporations to be able to give us what we need as employees? Yes.
Well, what I think is the most important in terms of giving responsibility is to actually give it to employees themselves. So they are self-aware, they are responsible for their own learning, and we just aid them in this process. So it's not our sole responsibility to do stuff for them and to kind of guide them through the whole process by giving them specific tasks, but showing that we trust them enough that they will do their job and that they will be eager to learn themselves. Without that, they may even feel less motivated because they are not given the opportunity. And just like Stacey said previously, it's important to give them also flexibility to learn the stuff themselves. Because if they are not given the opportunities to learn, to grow, then obviously it won't lead to the result that you're aiming at. You cannot get to the point that these people will be happy working for the company if they cannot grow their own talents without you interfering in it.
I was going to throw out something a little provocative here.
Let's go for it.
So there's a big movement about not having women have to report what their previous salary was at a job because women are systematically paid less than men. And there's interesting aspects when you dig into that story. I realize it feels like a little off topic, but I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, if you take a sort of behavioral economics look at this, what you see is what you intend your practices to evoke can be wildly different than what you think they will. So here's my honest prediction. If you take information out of the negotiation, average wages for women will go down. The spirit of don't ask women what their previous salary makes total sense to me. The goal that's trying to be achieved makes sense to me. But it turns out there's a lot of examples that are not a good check context, but where taking information away actually makes problems worse rather than better. And so I put that out there because some of these decisions about how much responsibility the company takes versus the individual are messy problems. They don't have clear answers. Because the truth is, the people that may step up and take the most advantage themselves, you may, as an organization, be robbing yourself. It's true you could be robbing motivation by just forcing people to do things or making decisions for them. But at the same time, are you confident that everyone that's reaching out and negotiating hard for their salary is actually generating, I mean, let me put it this way. For what software engineer is negotiation ability diagnostic of the quality of code that they write? I don't know any that is. And yet somehow we've decided that all software engineers should lean in and negotiate hard for their salaries, as opposed to we should pay them the value of their work. And I'm not saying that the solution to that problem is easy, but sometimes I think there's a role for companies to step in and say, what's actually in our long-term self-interest? Maybe we should go find people that might not step up on their own and engineer opportunities for them to grow and to be successful that they wouldn't have taken. And what I will say is, as we model this out in my massive 122 million person data sets, or with the company I mentioned of almost 500,000 people, is we see actually a huge amount, possibly a majority of value creation within a company essentially has no KPI attached to it, no individual level. So there's no individual metric someone's spitting out which is associated with the collaborative leadership they display or the help they give to other teams. So we don't track it, we don't reward it, we don't promote it, but when you leave people like that out of the process, your company suffers. And I think so there's a huge responsibility to be active in this process. Don't make decisions for other people, but you figure out how do you guide them towards what's going to make them most effective.
And, I want to kind of stream this to Danielle, because something you said earlier was higher education companies are using higher education as a proxy to assess employees. And that's kind of coming back to exactly what Vivian is saying, is that, you know, we've decided that as long as you have this degree, that you've gone through this process, that you are probably most likely going to be a good fit with this company, as opposed to the company themselves going out and looking in places where, you know, maybe they'll find much better connections.
Yeah, great segue into that, because what I was going to say about this whole conversation about where does it start, I think a lot of where things start is within the systems that we've implicitly and explicitly set up. There's some quote that's not coming to mind about like what you measure is the thing that you keep getting back at you. Jet lag. I can't remember it right now. But it really does start with these systems. And yeah, one of those systems is that hiring system. Where are we getting people? Do they have to come from a top-tier university? Assessment is really, really hard. Having been in the education system for a really long time, it's difficult. Like, I don't doubt it at all. But I do think that there are a lot of opportunities for companies to start making their own assessment measures instead of using that university as that proxy for conscientiousness and can-do and skill and things like that. I mean, I really look forward to a future where maybe what a company does is it has a certain culture. We've, you know, there's two companies that are coming to mind right now that I don't know sort of what reach they have, but one is like the Greenpeace people, like you see them on the sidewalk, and there's a personality type they are looking for, and I assume they train for it too. I don't know enough about what they do, but they have honed that down to a science. I think like Trader Joe's is the same way. You go to a Trader Joe's, every Trader Joe's employee is like happy, smiling, like they've got this down. So I think about this, and I think about what companies can do to sort of put out a particular culture that they have. I've been to the campuses of Google, Facebook, and Apple, and they all feel really different. Apple has this very like, we are adult, we are about excellence, we are pristine. When you are on their campus, there's a lot of white, there's a lot of green. When you're at Google, it's like we are fun, we are happy, we're doing way too many things all the time. That's sort of the culture there. And I think if we could start looking at like what is the type of person who would be interested there, and then what can we build into the systems in place to identify those people, and then do the skill building, especially in these really large companies. There's a lot of power in that, where people could be getting jobs younger, and, you know, and maybe even being at companies for a longer period of time, because it's about that growth, and it's not about, oh, I have this job here for 2 years and there's nowhere to go. But they think about that like adult development span of how are we going to have this person here and growing and growing and growing. But I really do think it comes back to systems and what these places measure.
So we're actually out of time, but I just want to thank all of you for being here today to discuss this very important issue. So to our panelists, thank you very much.